What is going on? Good evening, good evening. We made it here today for another Wednesday world history lesson. Without that being said, or with that being said, we're going to get into this quite shortly. So, this is going to be kind of funny, but this is supposed to be a part 2 lesson. So, let me give you some backdrop as far as what was supposed to be talked about the first half of it. So we're at a point in time in our storytelling of world history throughout these months and close to a year. We're at a point in time now in history to where the Roman Empire has, at this point, began to fall. It split basically into an eastern and a western side. You had the Roman Empire verbatim on its name on the eastern half of the empire, and then you have what became the Byzantine Empire on the western side of the empire towards Spain and probably half of what the Mediterranean Sea and the ocean looks like. So it's important to know and understand that at this point in time, got you. At this point in time, Rome is split into two. So that's going to be important to need to know when we're going into what we're going into tonight, which is the rise of Arab Islam. You know, when Islam became a thing as far as a practice and a belief system on contemporary moguls and people that you see today here in America, such as Malcolm X and brothers that had decided to practice and convert into Islam within the prison industrial system, and just others as well too. You know, everyday ordinary Israelites that something relevant tend to come from Southern Kingdom origins and backgrounds. So we're gonna trace back a little bit, and we're gonna get into that, of course, with some understanding of Islam, the Arabs, what it is that they're gonna do at this period of time that we're in right now, as far as prophecy is concerned, and everything in between. So let's get to the video point quickly. Switch to the camera. So we're gonna watch a quick video. Well, we're gonna be continuously watching a little quick video, and we want to let you guys know that we have fair usage writing, copyright of showing this because it's there for public information. So we're not using this to make profit or make money off of. This is just information that is true, factual, that is for people anywhere and everywhere to see. So we'll definitely drop the reference and a line to the creditors for this as we dig into it tonight. You can switch.
The Arab world is mostly identified with Islam, and for good reason. Islam was a catalyst of the biggest expansion of the Arabic people in history. It paid.
So I don't know if you guys can, I hope rather you guys can see what we're looking at right now, but you said, the man just said that Islam was an expansion of, well, the largest pretty much expansion and say how, you know, as far as name, dealing with these Arab peoples back in during this time, which was in the early parts of the 1000th century, around the 1100s, even with the 600, that was around the beginning. But we're going to get into that, and we're going to bring out some scriptures in a second too. But listen to this guy really quick.
Paved the way for the establishment of arguably the most powerful empire of its time, the Islamic Caliphate.
So I want you guys to see this picture when we can switch over back to the PowerPoint. Kanash. Picture's still on us in here. Okay, cool.
Which at its zenith ranged from Spain and North Africa in the west to Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent in the east. The Caliphate managed to be one of the most dominant political, military, scientific and cultural centers of the world for several centuries, while the religion of Islam remains one of the most important political and societal forces globally. But
so he's right now just giving you a, yeah, it's showing on here on the laptop, but we can't see it on there. You know what? You gotta. I remember I said. Con. We're gonna get you guys that image really quick. We're just having a little bit of technical difficulties with the audio, well, with the video input, but we got it straight right now. So we're gonna test this out. Sorry for that, but we're gonna test this out with you guys and then show you guys what we got real quick.
what was there before Islam? How did Arab people live, rule themselves? What did they believe in? Welcome to our video on Arabia before Islam. History is often complicated, but male height.
All right, so we got a basic overview. So I want to actually bring out some scriptures. So he did mention, as we said, that Arabs and Islam was a really big thing. So let's see what, and he's going to explain it too, and we're going to explain it, the origins of where Arab people come from and what they deal with in the scriptures and how they even relate to us. So let's get to Genesis chapter 16. Rather, let's get to Genesis 25, 12 through 18. Genesis chapter 25, 12 through 18.
Genesis chapter 25, verse 12. Now these are the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's handmaid, bare unto Abraham.
So a little bit forward in the history right now, we understand that Abraham, through his handmaid Hagar from Sarah, had a kid named Ishmael that at one point in time when he became of age was sent out, him and his mom, or Abraham's concubine. They were both sent out and sent to go live in the desert, the same desert that we know today as the Arabian Peninsula, as far as what we're going to get for coordinates and geography that's going to be spoke about shortly. Continue on.
And these are the names of the sons of Ishmael by their names according to their generations. The firstborn of Ishmael, Nebaioth, and Kedar, and Abil, and Mibsan, and Mishma, and Duma, and Massa, Hadar, and Tema, Jatur, Naphish, and Kedema. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their towns and by their castles, 12 princes according to their nations.
So we see that Ishmael himself, he has in a likeness of Israel and a similar likeness as far as the blessing that he was supposed to receive, but not the promise. 12 kids, 12 sons, and 12 tribes that will be coming out of Ishmael himself, dwelling in prehistory amongst the Arabian Peninsula. Let's get some factual information about that right now.
Hygiene isn't mostly a 4.0, package 4.0 perfects your grooming experience. 4.0 kit. Arabia was mostly a
All right, so we're going to switch to the PowerPoint back right now.
Islamic Arabia was mostly a nomadic society, inhabited by constantly moving tribal units.
So pre-Islamic Arabia was very, in a sense, similar to Israel as far as they had tribal groups. They lacked one particular thing, though. But again, the pre-Arabs or the Bedouins, they were nomadic peoples that operated in tribes based off of those families, those 12 sons of Ishmael, that we read about in Genesis. That's how they got down in the Arabian Peninsula.
These Bedouin tribes, some of which maintain their traditional nomadic lifestyle to this day, had been the most significant political unit of the Arabian Peninsula, with constantly shifting alliances, never-ending warfare, and rare occurrences of organized and centralized statehood. These tribes placed heavy emphasis on kin-related groups and families, and would roam through the deserts with their livestock, mainly comprising of sheep, goats, and camels, living in tents with their immediate family members. The tribal leaders enforced unwritten rules of the Bedouin society in the tribe. Bedouin tribes were patriarchal, as inheritance passed to male offspring, and women could not inherit property and were virtually rightless, as they could be seized in tribal conflicts as a spoil of war, and the Bedouin laws allowed the men to marry their captives. The number of women a man could marry was not fixed. When a man died, his son inherited all his wives, except his own mother. Women in tribal Arabia had little say in their marriages, as they would often be arranged between a man and his future wife's family, and the family would receive property like camels or horses in exchange for the bride. There were also cases of killing female infants, as the Muslim holy book, the Quran, mentions that the Arabs of the period of ignorance, called Jahiliyyah, would bury their daughters alive.
So just an important reference. So the Quran itself, the supposed holy book of the Arab peoples in totality, it gives you a history of what they were like before Arab unification. So again, remember, the 12 tribes of Ishmael operated, independently, much almost like in the likeness, as we're going to find out too, when you read about in the book of Judges in our scriptures, how it was pretty much similar to that time back then, where every tribe and cities were kind of doing their own thing. They weren't necessarily, even though we were given the covenant, how to operate, we were still kind of, for a time, doing things on our own sense. Ishmael, at this point, was been doing that amongst himself during these times in prehistory. So we're going to bring out a specific prophecy that deals with that amongst himself and others as well too. But that's how Ishmael and his sons, the tribes of Ishmael, were going and living at this time, before the Quran.
The Bedouin men often considered women an economic burden and a potential source of embarrassment, as the capture of women of the tribe by hostile tribes was considered humiliating in the conservative Bedouin society. Under the circumstances of lack of centralized states, with rare exceptions, there were no written laws, courts, or law enforcement of any kind to protect the population. Thus, the principal purpose of a Bedouin tribe.
So basically what they're saying right now is that unlike us, they didn't have any centralized, federal or government such as that. They didn't have a particular law that united them during these times. They did things on their own.
Tribe was to protect its members. Vengeance was sought for the killing of a tribe member by another tribe, which led to virtually constant warfare and conflict. Protecting your tribe and avenging your kin was a high honor. Harsh living conditions of the Arabian.
So let's get into, this is going to be the first time I'm going to bring out this particular blessing or this prophecy about Ishmael so that we can understand the nature of him. Let's get to Genesis chapter 16. And I'm going to tell you what specific verse to read into. But go to Genesis chapter 16, and we're going to start at verse 8. Genesis 16, and we're going to start from verse 11.
Genesis chapter 16, verse 11. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and shalt call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. And he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren.
So that's dealing with what we just read on the first layer of it, about Ishmael being a wild man. You know, we hear that a lot thrown around in the Israelite community when we're trying to figure out the other nations and such like that. Ishmael was a wild man because he had no, they didn't have a common law that they would govern themselves by, unlike us. So that is something that would, that would make you wild. Every tribe, every one of the 12 princes amongst each other, if you were paying attention and and was listening to the man speaking on the video, they were at constant odds against each other. There was no particular rule that they had that united all Arabs or all Ishmaelites at this time. They were all going against each other, avenging a family member, taking vengeance on one another for whatever reason, as long as blood was spilled. So that's dealing with within their community themselves about how they operate, as a people. So fulfilling that promise or that understanding that the angel gave Hagar and Ishmael and Ishmael's descendants.
Arabian Peninsula further enhanced the tribal system and sense of identity within a tribe, as often their protection and economic cooperation was the difference between death and survival. French historian Maxime Rodinson states that the free Arabs were bound by no written code of law, and no state existed to enforce its statutes with the backing of a police force. The only protection for a man's life was the certainty established by custom.
So again, Israel as a nation, we have a state. Our state and our enforcement is the laws, statutes, and commandments that God gave us. So that's one of the big differences. We don't operate as, the homie and the family on the block of Gainford against, the homie and his family on the block of Lubbock. It's, there's a common ground between wherever you stay at because we all agree to one thing. Ishmael didn't have that. Oh, no.
Supply, which some managed all of the city pre-Islamic tributes to it would be dearly bought. Blood for blood and a life for a life. The vendetta, tha'ar in Arabic, is one of the pillars of Bedouin society.
That's what they believed in.
Austrian historian Gustav E. von Grunebaum reiterated this and described the state of affairs in Arabia in the century before the rise of Islam as tribal guerrilla fighting, all against all. Tribes would fight against each other, attack and plunder caravans and sedentary settlements, as lawlessness was the law of the land in most of Arabia. Caravans and sedentary settlements would pay tributes to the raiding Bedouin tribes to avoid their attacks.
So just some terms you want to look into, modern day terms for when you're researching yourselves into Ishmael and the Arabs. Bedouin, the Bedouin people, that's a collective name for all the different tribes of the 12 princes of Ishmael.
While most of the tribes in Arabia went on with their nomadic lifestyle, some managed to gain influence over certain territories and switched to a sedentary life. Mecca was practically ruled by the skilled merchants of the Quraysh tribe that took control of the...
So I just wanted you guys to hear that first 6 minutes of this video. We're not really spending too much time on the details of pre-Islamic Ishmael, but you do want to understand just a few of those main key points. They had no constitution that they all followed. They were all nomadic peoples. That's why they used camels. Camels were good in the desert to go back and forth between all of the Arabian Peninsula. And if you don't know what the Arabian Peninsula it looks like, get your Google on your phone and check and look at this. All this pink land right there that you see in this Bible atlas, that is the territory of Ishmael. Not the green, not the orange, the pink. The Arabian Peninsula, that is the land allotment of your so-called Arab people. And I say that only to bring out another point that we're going to talk about later on this lesson with a peoples that people oftentimes mistake for being Arabs, but which are not Arabs at all. But we're going to get into that later.
City sometime in the 5th century. while Yathrib, which was later named Medina, was dominated by the Arab tribes of Aus and Khazraj, and the Jewish tribes Natir, Kenuka.
So we have what we're hearing now that, and we're gonna get some back history to that, Jewish tribes. There were some Jewish tribes that lived at a point and a period of time amongst the Arab people. Let's get into some back history with that so we can understand the flow of the narrator of this video. So we're gonna get into, I wanna say, let's get into Isaiah chapter 21. If you know anything about the prophecies in Isaiah, it was prophecies written during a time that was dealing with the oncoming and the imminent, like on hand, Babylonian captivity of Southern Kingdom Israelites for the most part, is dealing with that time. Also, you know, the other prophecies against the Northern Kingdom who at that time had already been and were about to be gone. But it also talks about, in its likeness, the future Babylon, or not the Neo Babylon, but the daughter of Babylon as well too. There's also parallels in Isaiah that match the times that we're living in now, as well as the times that had already passed back then. So let me get, again, we're getting to the point and reason how Jews or Israelites were living amongst the Arabs. First important point is knowing that there is already a scattering. Our people already have been at this point in time, and even since 766 BC, we were already being scattered around the world. Period. So it's no big thing or new thing rather that Israelites would be found within the Arab peoples. But I want to bring out this, and we're going to probably bring up this a couple times. Isaiah 21 and verse 13.
Isaiah chapter 21, verse 13. The burden upon Arabia and the forest in Arabia shall ye lodge, O ye traveling companies of Didanim. The inhabitants of the land of Tema brought water to him that was thirsty. They prevented with their bread him that fled. For they fled from the swords, from the drawing swords, and from the bent bow, and from the grievousness of war. For thus hath the Lord said unto me within a year, according to the years of a hireling, and all the glory of Kedar shall fail. And the residue of the number of archers, the mighty men of the children of Kedar, shall be diminished, for the Lord God of Israel hath spoken it.
Okay, so some of that, or a lot of that, goes extra from what we're going to be speaking about in this lesson tonight. But we know that when the Most High is prophesying in Isaiah, he's talking to both us, the scatterings as well as individual nations along with us and the scattering of Israel. So this is specifically talking about, and when we read in Isaiah 21, this particular nation of people dealing with Ishmael. So let me continue on with this video. So we're getting on Jews living amongst Ishmael.
While Yathrib, which was later named Medina, was dominated by the Arab tribes of Aus and Khazraj, and the Jewish tribes Natir, Kenuka, and Kureza. While the nomadic Bedouins viewed sedentary life with contempt and thought of the town dwellers as a nation of shopkeepers, the emergence of cities like Mecca was the primary cause of the dawn of the common Arab identity in the pre-Islamic period.
Okay, cool. So we read that some of our people, basically what he said, influenced the modern thought of what Islam would be today. Now I want to just kind of read from this source where we have right here. This is a book, photo book. It's called Islam, Just Islam, by Caesar E. Farah, a PhD. So the book is called Islam Distributed by Barons, and we're gonna read. We're gonna read the chapter on page 28 called, or the subheader called Jewish Settlements. So you can read from there.
Muhammad was in contact with Jews in Yathrib, Medina, with whom he disputed theologically, but later broke for political reasons.
So the same Muhammad that brought Islam to Arabs, to unify Arabs, their people. Jews were already dwelling amongst them, that we just heard right now. In double sources, Yathrib, Mecca even being a big major tribal city with a particular tribe that you guys can do your research on your own time. You can continue reading this.
During this brief period of exchanges, he acquired a number of ritualistic concepts from them.
Taking some of our customs, applying it to his people.
But the influence of strictly Jewish beliefs is still under debate.
That's not under debate. Continue.
Although the presence of Jewish tribes in Arabia dates back to 1200 BC.
That's as early as it began. So that's even that's before the Northern Kingdom. That's before Northern Kingdom expulsion, and quite possibly around the time of Solomon, if not a little bit before. Forgive me for not doing the dates and timelines, but it's pretty early on, considering Israel finally got our act together around the time of Saul and David, and then onwards. Continue.
When the racial tribes spent their wandering years in Sinai and Al-Nufud, it was not until the first Christian century, following the second unsuccessful uprising against the Romans in 132 to 135 after Christ, that an influx of Jewish tribes and some proselytizing among Bedouins brought them into the Hijaz. On the eve of Islam, they had acquired some of the best land in the oasis of Tema, Khaybar, and Yathrib.
So that's talking about Israelites obtaining the best land. So what we just read right now is that, yes, there was already Israelites dwelling within Arabia, particularly Yathrib and Medina. But then but that was, those amounts living there for that amount of time. Later on, the more influx of Israelites, Southern Kingdom Israelites in particular, dwelling amongst the Arabs, came after Christ, and when the Roman Empire began to officially persecute Jews and Judeans. And it said, what, in 123 BC? That's definitely after 123 AD, and that's definitely after 70 AD. And we know 70 AD as to be the siege of Jerusalem, when all hell was breaking loose in Judea, people dying, eating our own kids and such like that. And of course, being warned by Christ to flee into the mountains, whether in the north or the south. This is dealing with our people that actually fled there towards the more majority of Israelites, Jews, fleeing towards the Arab areas. You can continue reading that.
In Yathrib alone, they constituted nearly one half the population. Knowledge of superior agricultural techniques, monopoly over important commodities of trade like iron, used in making arms, coats of mail, and agricultural tools, resulted in their dominance in the rich oasis and at the important trade fairs of Tema.
So the way that Israelites have always dwelled upon the earth has always been, as far as being taught by the Most High, a superior form of living than all of the other nations, and even Ishmael. Remember, Ishmaelites before all this, they were nomadic people. They never settled because they didn't know how to use the land, oasis or not. Israelites, we have been knowing how to settle, and if need be, we would move if need be, but we would definitely move to a place where we could settle, you know? So that's something that we had going for us, living amongst them, and sometime down the line, they started adopting that. It said that they had Bedouin converts and proselytes as well, too, to our customs. And I'm pretty sure that deals with both them as a people that are not Israelites, as well as scattered Israelites as well, too. I believe it works twofold with that. So Israel becoming Israel again, and Ishmael adopting our ways and customs, as we see in Islam. But yeah, so a lot of times you'll see that Israelites were, in history, we were usually merchants because we had abundance of things to sell or teach or be of service to. So we were always, again, in anywhere that we dwelt, we were always contracted for something. And we got wealthy off of it because of customs that we had in our laws, such as charging usury. We already knew stuff like that, so we would make bank off that. But through curses, some of the other nations caught on and started using that amongst us as well, too. But keep reading that.
And Yathrib, to secure this dominance, they played upon the rivalries among the Aus and Khazars. Both tribes had engaged in a long feud with them for control of the palm tree plantations in the neighboring oases. It was to resolve their perennial dispute that they invited Muhammad to come to Yathrib and serve as mediator. This, as we shall see, was of important consequence to the development of the Islamic polity and crystallization of Islamic institutions.
So again, that beginning of the bubbling of what will become modern-day Arabs. Let's get back to this audio, since we don't see the video.
The most important cities of the Arabian Peninsula, Mecca and Yathrib, were situated in Hijaz, a region with sufficient water supply, which made it a logical choice for a sedentary lifestyle in the otherwise punishing climate and terrain of Arabia.
So Israel already knew wherever there's water, be there, even in the desert.
Mecca was an important trade center in the region, a place through which caravans would flow, as well as the location of the Kaaba, a sacred place in Islam, which was also sacred in polytheistic Arabia, where the statues of idols and gods of different Arabic tribes were placed. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus, who lived between 60 and 30 BC, wrote about the isolated region of Arabia in his work Bibliotheca Historica, describing Kaaba as a very holy temple, which was exceedingly revered by all Arabians. For example, the chief deity of the Quraysh tribe and Mecca was Hubal.
The land is dying, and the machines meant to help us are out of control.
We got to add real quick. We're going to skip through that, and hopefully not another one. So while it's loading, so what you guys want to know, it said, and it's going to point out two important places as far as Arabs are concerned and their true religion, and mention the Kaaba. Now, if you guys know anything about Islam, they go to a place where, what is the cobblestone? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's where that comes from. So before Islam, the cobblestone or the Kaaba already existed. And that comes from Ishmaelites before unifying and believing in one God under Islam, being polytheistic people. Them as a people, no different than they were interwarring and intertribaling amongst each other and had no one common law. They also had no common God. They had multiple gods within each tribe. And Kaaba just so happened to be a surviving one of the many gods that Ishmaelites used to serve and worship and pretend about back in the day, the Kaaba, the cobblestone. As well as we're going to find out another major place in another Arab tribe, Mecca. But we're going to let the video continue, or the audio.
usual trading routes through the Red Sea and the Tigris and Euphrates were disrupted by piracy and the Roman-Persian conflict, and caravans and traders switched to the trade route going through Mecca. Goods from beyond the Red Sea and of the local Bedouin tribes would be brought to Mecca, from where the camel caravans would transport them to the Levant. Meccans signed treaties with the Byzantine Empire and Bedouin tribes for safe passage of their trading caravans. As the home of the Kaaba, Mecca also carried a religious significance for the polytheistic Arabs.
So, excuse me, Mecca, a major city in pre-Islamic Arabs, was the city where the Kaaba or the cobblestone was. So that's a surviving tradition of Ishmael.
As once a year, Arabs from all over Arabia would make a pilgrimage to Kaaba and drink from the sacred Zamzam well. At this time of the year, conflict would stop, a truce would be declared, disputes and debts would be resolved, and trade happened between different tribes. Thus, Mecca became a center of a loose confederation of tribes around this city.
Mecca began to become basically that's when centralization between Arab tribes began, was because of Mecca, and then Muhammad doing what he did, going to Mecca, which was understood between Arabs at this time, which was again around the 1000 AD, finally, that they decided that, hey, this is going to be common ground. We're not going to do our own customs, our own thing here. We're going to at least play by some common rules by the people here at this city because they respected that as such.
As guests were obliged to follow the rules in Mecca. The trading potential of Mecca and its religious significance for the Arabs turned it into a factor bringing Arabs together and forming their national identity.
And also, we want to read too, which we're going to get back to this book. Also, Christian influences. We heard that there was trade routes and Bedouins, both Bedouins that converted to Judaism and Bedouins, Arabs that converted to Christianity, because again, Christianity had began flourishing supremely in the empire, the Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire, after around 100 AD, somewhere in the middle of that. That's when Christianity really began to take flight in the Roman world, and then hence, the rest of the world from there too. So again, these traders, these Bedouin traders, were getting influence and converted from that. Let's read the subheader right here on page 29 in Islam, Christian elements. Again, these are all factors of how Islam is going to get constructed.
The Christian settlements in Arabia during this crucial period left perhaps less of an impact on the development of Islam, principally because the chief Christian centers were on the periphery of the peninsula.
So right now we're just talking about geography. Because the Christian Empire of Rome in particular and the travels to Byzantine, they were really close. So that's why that influence was right there. But again, it's not, what we're going to find out, it wasn't just Christians. There was another empire as well too. But we'll get into that. Continue.
In Najran, north of Yemen, in Syria, and Hira in lower Iraq, there was a minor settlement in Mecca consisting of caravan leaders, monks, merchants from Syria, curers, healers, doctors, dentists, smiths, carpenters, scribes, Christian women married into the Quraysh, and slaves from Mesopotamia, Egypt, Syria, and Byzantine sold in the marketplace of the town. Bedouins of the Hijaz on their caravan journeys to Syria and other Christian centers undoubtedly carry back with them a superficial knowledge of Christian beliefs and customs.
So more cultural adoption by Christians.
Dissident Christian sects, mostly of the Monophysite confession, and numerous monks turned ascetics had their retreats in the steppes of North Arabia along caravan routes. As a caravan leader, Muhammad is said to have befriended a Christian monk, Bahira, and to have worn tunics which were the gift of other Christian monks. Two Christianized Arab tribes, Judam and Udra, roamed the Hijaz. According to local tradition, there were even Christian religious artifacts in the Kaaba at Mecca.
So again, we know Muhammad now, according to these facts, he had dealings with Jews practicing Judaism and Christians of whatever creed, but at this time were more than likely Israelites that considered themselves Christians. He had dealings with both. We know both sides, as well as another religion that came from the East that we're going to get into shortly as well too. But let me see if there's anything relevant.
I also want to add on to that. This is a book called From Babylon to Timbuktu. In regards to, Muhammad dealing with the Jewish, the Christians and everything, you guys can read page 45 on the bottom, and I can read this real quick, and you can chime in if you want. It says, after Muhammad became a camel driver, he traveled to remote and intriguing lands. He led his caravans to Persia, Syria, and Egypt, transacting business with merchants of every kind. On his business trips, he met Jews, Christians, and members of other sects. He interrogated them concerning the tenets of their religions. He frequented the environment of the Jews and their rabbis mostly because there were merchants and an omnipresent ethnic group. Because he could not read or write, his ears were attentive and keen to everything that the Jews related to him. Muhammad learned and extracted much from the Jewish religion and compounded it with his new religion, Islam.
It's beautiful when you have all these sources confirming the same thing and saying the same thing, and even when you get the prehistorical names. So with that being said, I think we got a good amount from what we read from both sources. Let's continue the flow with this audio.
Another important city of Arabia was Yathrib, Medina. It was an agricultural center, also situated in a fertile region of Hijaz, which allowed the city to become an important transit point for trade caravans traveling along the Red Sea. Initially, Yathrib was dominated by Jewish tribes, but gradually several Arabic tribes moved to Yathrib and gained political and economic influence in the city too. While Arabs were mainly engaged in agriculture, Jews would also be active as businessmen. The rise of cities was inevitably going to lead to the rise of commerce too, and the rise of commerce was inevitably going to lead to usury, a practice which was used by both the Arabs and Jews. This practice would be later prohibited by Islam.
So I mentioned that earlier, our people understanding what the Most High told us, charging usury. That's how, even though we were clients and essentially servants, we were still pretty well-off clients and servants and respectable. But it was a thing too where the Arabs, they were like, hey, we can start doing this too. So I'm pretty sure the tug and forth or the back and forth tug was pretty brutal back then a little bit.
Eddie saw that even in pre-Islamic Arabia, religion played an important role in shaping the common Arab identity. What religion did the Arabs practice before the rise of Islam? Religion in pre-Islamic Arabia was a mix of polytheism, Christianity, Judaism, and Iranian religions. Arab polytheism, or paganism, was the most popular belief system. Each tribe, city, and region could have its own god or idol, which was in a way a patron of that particular community. Arabs also believed in supernatural beings like jinns. Statues of gods and goddesses would be placed in Kaaba, and some scholars argue that Allah, the deity of Islam and other Abrahamic religions, also had a statue in Kaaba. There are hadiths, the authenticity of which is disputed, claiming that Kaaba also had an image of the Virgin Mary and baby Jesus, with Abraham looking over them. Overall, it is estimated that Kaaba contained up to 360 such statues and images. Trading and political relations with the Byzantine Empire, Ethiopia, Persia, and other neighboring forces had a role in shaping the religious landscape of Arabia too.
So understand what he said, as well as Persia. Persia, who we're going to explain who they are today as far as dealing with a lot of the prophecies and nature of Ishmael today.
As early as the 1st century AD, Arab traders brought Christianity to Arabia. Others were evangelized by Paul's ministry in Arabia and by St. Thomas, followed by a strong influence from the Byzantine Empire.
See, Paul's ministry in Arabia. We all know Paul was looking for Israelites. So again, a lot of these so-called Bedouin proselytes were just Jews or Israelites that were just waiting for the time to come back home and be re-branched in. So they, again, Israel dealing with Ishmael for the most part was just business. But as far as getting the practices of our practice and religion back, at this time, you know, Paul's mission and everyone else, they were looking for Israelites, those whose spirits who bared witness to the covenant. So again, Israel was there amongst the Arabs, just, you know, living aimlessly and lost, no different than Israel all over the rest of the world. We were there and had been there because of the scattering. Lots of scatterings.
For example, the Ghassanids, a vassal kingdom of Rome, converted to Christianity. In the south of the country, a strong Christian community emerged in Najran as a result of the influence of the Ethiopian Christian kingdom of Aksum. Nestorian Christianity was strong in parts of the country, but the most popular denomination was monophysitism. Judaism was also a significant part of the religious landscape of Arabia. As a result of Roman persecution, the migration of Jewish people to Arabia started as early as the 1st century AD. Many Jews found homes in Hijaz and towns like Yathrib, Khaybar, Fadak, and al-Qura. Many Arabs also converted to Judaism, as often it was a condition of settling in Jewish-dominated towns of Hijaz. The Yemeni Himyarite kingdom converted to Judaism in the 4th century, and some of the Kinda, a tribe in central Arabia who were the Himyarites' vassals, were also converted by the 5th century. Sources also inform about a monotheistic religion centered around the worship of a single god of the Abrahamic religions, but apparently it was not affiliated with Christianity or Judaism and was probably centered around the prophethood of Abraham. Followers of this religion were called Hafini people, and they rejected the idolatry and paganism of the majority of Arabs, sharing some of the features of other Abrahamic religions, like the prohibition of pork. The scope of expansion of the Hafini people is unclear, but according to some Islamic sources, the Prophet of Islam, Mohammad, and some of his future companions belonged to this religion. Arabia also had a small minority following Iran-based religions like Zoroastrianism, Mazdekism, and others, spreading under Persian influence.
Persian influence, again, something you want to know about when we're going to continue on this lesson.
Emergency. Help convert the church into a masjid before Ramadan. Brothers and sisters.
Earlier we mentioned how in the pre-Islamic period, Arab statehood was relatively rare, as Arabia constantly moved from tribal anarchy to loose state organizations and back again. But there have been a number of notable states in Arabia in the pre-Islamic period mentioned in Greek, Roman, Mesopotamian and Persian sources, and oral Arab traditions later recorded by Islamic scholars. According to the Arab classical writers, Arabs divided themselves into the Yemenites, the South Arabs descended from Qatan, and the North Arabs descended from Adnan. It is interesting that these two groups had certain distinctions, and the existence of statehood and political systems were among them. South Arabia, Yemen, had more established states, and all of them were ruled as monarchies.
So you should know Yemen still exists as a state or a country within the Arab Peninsula today. So that's something that has been surviving, Yemen. Just some things you want to know.
In the north, loose tribal confederations or de facto city-states like Mecca were a more prevalent form of statehood. Such states were ruled as oligarchies and aristocracies. The south was considered more advanced, as it was the key route of trade in Arabia, prior to the emergence of Mecca as an alternative, and had a higher degree of contact with outsiders such as Ethiopians. From the 4th century onwards, a reverse process started, as many southern tribes migrated to the north and underwent northern influence. The South Arabian script vanished, and North Arabian proliferated in Arabia. The Thamud tribe, or tribal union, was one of the first recorded states in Arabia, which was a prominent force in northwestern Arabia according to the Assyrian sources related to the 8th century BC, and were later used as auxiliary forces by the Roman Empire according to the Roman sources. In the 3rd century BC,
So everything we're hearing right now is pretty much, again, the organization of the Arab state and, a centralized Arab nation. That's pretty much what we've been kind of hearing for the past 3 minutes. So just don't lose us here. We're not trying to lose you here. But again, it's this steady building blocks of what we're going to be expanding on and still continue on. Because we still got some scriptures to bring out as far as what the Bible says about this particular time that's going to be coming up.
The Greek scholar Eratosthenes mentioned Manaeans, Sabaeans, Katabanians, and Hadramites.
Something you want to know too is the Sabaeans. Let's just bring out a couple scriptures where that particular tribe are mentioned in the Bible, so you know that these are the Arabs that we're talking about. You can read in Joel chapter 3, and we're just going to get into that really quickly. You could also hear about the Sabaeans in the book of Job. Those were the people that, the men with swords that killed Job's household. That was the Sabaeans that was written about in the book of Job. Joel, let me get there because I don't know what's going on.
Joel, what chapter?
Joel chapter 3 and verse 8. And this is dealing with the judgment upon the Grecians.
Joel chapter 3, verse 8. And I will sell your sons and your daughters into the hand of the children of Judah, and they shall sell them to the Sabaeans, to a people far off, for the Lord has spoken it.
So that's just prophecy dealing with a future time, dealing with the Grecians, the Greek Empire and such. That's a notable mention for Saba or the Sabaeans in the scriptures, which are dealing with, again, Arabs, Ishmaelites.
As the main people inhabiting the Arabian Peninsula,
Sabaeans.
Historians mention the independent Sabaean kingdom situated in present-day Yemen, which was later conquered by the Himyarite kingdom.
What you want to know today, too, Yemen is a real state that still exists modern day. So the Sabaeans are now known as, today, modern-day Yemen. What we have right here, if you guys can see, on the Bible atlas, then and now, Yemen is right here. So you can get a Google, get your own maps, Google Maps, but Yemen is this part right there, the bottom part of the Arabian Peninsula, and that's where the Sabaeans dwell for the most part to this day, right there.
Around 280 AD. The Himyarite kingdom was one of the most prominent pre-Islamic states of the Arabian Peninsula. It was ruled by a monarch, but in practice, the power of the state was shared with regional governors, which had a high degree of autonomy, a system akin to medieval-era European kingdoms. By the early 4th century AD, the Himyarite kingdom ruled over southern Arabia and expanded north to Najran. Originally polytheistic Himyarites, became monotheistic sometime in the 4th century with a belief in the Abrahamic God. At the end of the 5th century, the Himyarite king Abu Kariba adopted Judaism as his faith. His son and successor Yusuf Dunuwas was even more zealous, as he started persecuting Christians living in the kingdom. This proved to be the undoing of the Himyarite dynasty, as Dunuwas was either killed or committed suicide after being defeated by the Christian coalition of the Ethiopian kingdom of Aksum, the Byzantine Empire, and South Arabian Christians in 524. Christian Ethiopians then took control of South Arabia, built a church in Sana in an attempt to attract pilgrims, and hence trade to Sana in place of Mecca. This caused a conflict between Abraha, the Ethiopian viceroy in Yemen, and Mecca, mentioned in the Quran. Apparently, Abraha used war elephants against Mecca, but was unsuccessful and had to turn back. The second part of the 6th century was notable for the power struggle between Ethiopians and Sassanids for control over the remainder of the Himyarite.
So right now we're hearing again that some of these Ishmaelite tribes are now having issues with Ethiopians, which are Hamites over in the west, and as well as the Persians, which are known as at this time the Sassanid Empire. So on two sides of the Arabian Peninsula, both the east and the west, there's already warfare with dealing with Ishmael that he's making with these people, the Ethiopians and the Sassanid Empire.
Kingdom, in which the Persian Empire succeeded. Another prominent pre-Islamic state organization in Arabia was the Kinda Kingdom, the first state in Central Arabia recorded by history, which came to existence after the Kinda tribe managed to unite all tribes in Najd around the late 5th century. The Kinda Kingdom attempted a number of successful raids on Byzantine territories in North Arabia, but similar endeavors against the Sassanid Empire failed, when in 529 the Lakhmid vassals of the Persians defeated and killed the Kindan king Al-Harith bin Amr, which caused the decline of this state. The aforementioned Lakhmid kingdom was established in East Arabia by the Banu Lakham tribe around the 3rd to 4th centuries. Initially, independent Lakhmids were threatening the coastal cities of the Sassanid Empire, and in 325 the Sassanid Emperor Shapur II began a campaign against them. Soon the
So what is the problem? Let's read it again in Genesis. If you guys are not following along, I'll explain it to you. But let's get back to Genesis chapter 16 and verse, I believe it was 10 or 11. We're talking about the hand of Ishmael. Let's let the scripture speak. You got it?
Genesis chapter 16, verse 11. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and shalt call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction, and he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren.
So again, Ishmael, at this time, he's going to war with Cush and the Hamites, and he's going to war with the Persians, known as the Sassanid Empire, Japheth. He's going to war with them, as well as all the war that he's been having amongst each other. And then as we get more into Islam's establishment, who he's going to have war with, Ishmaelites, when that happens, even to the point of what you might consider betrayal and backstabbing. But, that's, not people of the Most High. Let's continue on. But again, we're talking about right now, the past 5 minutes, understanding that the different tribes of Ishmael were going to war with the Byzantine settlements, with settlements of Cush and settlements of the Sassanid Empire, which are the Persians and the Medes, descendants of Japheth.
Lakhmid capital Hira was taken under control of the Sassanids. Since then, the Lakhmid kingdom became vassals of the Sassanid Empire until it was annexed by them in the early 7th century. The Ghassanid kingdom had a similar fate. Sometime in the 3rd century AD, Part of the Alad tribe migrated from Yemen to the Levant and established the Ghassanid kingdom as a vassal of the Eastern Roman Empire, with a capital at Jabiyah in the Golan Heights. The Ghassanid kingdom ceased its existence in the period of early Islamic expansion. But none of these kingdoms were powerful and centralized enough to unite Arabs in one state and protect the realm from foreign attack. Most of Arabia was governed by unwritten rules of Bedouin society, causing warfare and despair amidst already harsh living conditions. The pre-Islamic Arabs might have shared similar language and traditions, but they were divided by tribal identities, blood revenge, and religions. But very soon, Arabia and beyond would be transformed by a momentous process of the emergence of Islam and the creation of a unified Arabic state. More videos on ancient...
And we're going to get into that in this book right now. Pretty much the beginning of Islam coming to fruition. We're going to get back to the book called Islam, and I want you to read the subheader, The Break with the Jews, and down.
The main Jewish tribes, Qurayza, Banu al-Nadir, and Kainuga, though signatories of pacts with Muhammad, which essentially granted protection to those who committed no crimes and provided for mutual assistance against aggression, chose not to abide by their commitment. Moreover, the Banu Kainuka turned to ridiculing the Muslims and challenging their fighting abilities. Muhammad besieged them in their quarters for 15 days, following which they evacuated Medina for the borders of Syria. They had sided with Muhammad's enemies in open violation of the terms of the charter, and their protector, Ibn Ubay, failed in convincing the Prophet to grant them protection. The Banu al-Nadir were quick to perceive that Jewish positions in Medina were no longer tenable.
So Muhammad is now making the point, and the political point, they're like, hey, you know what? We're not having good relations with these Jews anymore, with these practicing Judaism people, even though regardless, despite of everything we've learned from them, amongst other peoples, it's not going too good with them being here in our land, basically. Continue.
Efforts at reconciliation failed, particularly when the hypocrites supported their position against Muhammad. A military showdown was inevitable. It took place in 626, with Muhammad launching the assault by laying siege to the stronghold of the Banu al-Nadir.
So remember, the Banu al-Nadir was a Jewish bloodline people that had just taken on some of the name Arab, culture by name, living among there. But that's Israelites. Those are Israelites that Muhammad is now deciding to besiege and make war against at the beginning of Islam's explosion.
After 15 days of being hemmed in, they requested and were granted permission to leave Medina with their movable property. Their holdings in land and opportunities were turned over to the Muhajirin. This was a precedent set for the disposal of property gained in warfare in the future. The Banu Kainuka had been banished from Mecca earlier before the showdown with Banu al-Nadir.
So let's read from right here. So basically, we got the understanding without too much of the details that Muhammad was mad for some treaty breakings that happened. So he decided to take over and take back and kick out everything that he knew belonged to him as far as them being Ishmaelites and Arabs. You can read from right here.
Next, Muhammad embarked on an expedition to encircle Mecca and subdue the neighboring tribes who usually allied themselves with the Quraysh. Having accomplished this mission, He next set out with 1,400 of his followers on a pilgrimage to the city in 628. The Quraysh at first were determined to block his entry into the city, but the diplomatic genius of Muhammad again turned an adverse situation into a victory. At al-Habudiyah, leaders of the Quraysh concluded an agreement with the Muslims that granted them permission to perform the pilgrimage in the following year, provided Muhammad would accept a 10-year truce. This was an important gain for the Muslims, as the conclusion of a pact with the Quraysh was tantamount to their being recognized as equals. The pact went further by permitting those who wished to accept Islam. Many did.
Khan, so many did, and that was what we see in time to come as far as Islam's, again, its expansion. And I don't know if you guys understand the scope and how big Islam's expansion was, to the point of converting non-Arab peoples. That's how big Islam expansion was. First upon Jews that lived among the area, originally practicing Judaism, and now finding themselves to be Muslims, Christians, and then all the way outreaching towards Africa and its 100 years of time, and even reaching into Persia and the Medes in its reaching time. That was, and even into parts of northern Europe as well too. That's over like a 400 to 500, 600 year history that we don't necessarily have right now. But I want to bring out this scripture right here in Isaiah, just to prove and confirm even more about the Bedouins, Ishmael, the Arabs, really being at odds, like the scriptures say, with everybody, you know, by really dwelling amongst everybody and taking out their customs, but still being at odds with them. Let's get a prophecy that deals with things that have been going on since Christ's death. In Isaiah chapter 21, and we're going to read from verse 1, and we're going to break this down, and we're going to read pretty much down to verse 10.
Isaiah chapter 21, verse 1, the burden of the desert of the sea.
The burden of the desert of the sea. In case you don't know, maybe a lot of people don't know this, but Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, for the most part, is a big desert. And it's in between the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, and the Arabian Sea. So geographically, this is talking about this area. This is a prophecy dealing with the land inhabitants of the Arabian Peninsula, which are the Arab people, Ishmael. This is concerning them and all that dwell among them and around them. That's what this prophecy is for. Read, continue.
As whirlwinds in the south pass through, so it cometh from the desert, from a terrible land. A grievous vision is declared unto me. The treacherous dealer dealeth treacherously, and the spoiler spoileth. Go up, O Elam, besiege, O Media, all the sighing thereof have I made to cease.
So when it's talking about Elam and Medea, what we just heard about in the audio lesson, the Sassanid Empire and the influence of Arab tribes from Persian culture, that's dealing with them. This is the tribes of Japheth. And Elam too, I believe, descending from Shem, but that territory over there, the Sassanid Empire in Persia had taken over India. That's why a lot of India, they practice that Hindu stuff. That actually that descends from Zoroastrianism and Iranian customs and cultures. Because the Iranians, which is what I was trying to bring out earlier, the Iranian people are not Arabs. The Iranians are not Bedouins. The Iranians are separate. Those are descendants of Japheth. Arabs and Bedouins and Ishmaelites are descendants of Shem. So that's something that even myself, in time of understanding, had to come to the conclusion and the understanding is that completely different sets and type of people. We're not taught that, in school, but Iran and Iraq are completely different. Iraq is dealing with the Arabs. Iran is dealing with the Persians or Japheth people. So you should know that, because that's why it's mentioning Elam and Medea. That's the people that are now being told in this prophecy to besiege and go against Arabia. Again, another world power at that time going against Ishmael, and Ishmael going against them. You can continue.
Therefore are my loins filled with pain. Pangs have taken hold upon me, as the pangs of a woman that travaileth. I was bowed down at the hearing of it. I was dismayed at the seeing of it. My heart panted, fearfulness affrighted me. The night of my pleasure hath he turned into fear unto me. Prepare the table, watch in the watchtower, eat, drink, arise, ye princes, and anoint the shield. For thus hath the Lord said unto me, go set a watchman, let him declare what he seeth. And he saw a chariot with a couple of horsemen, a chariot of asses, and a chariot of camels, and he hearkened diligently with much heed. And he cried, a lion, my Lord, I stand continually upon the watchtower in the daytime, and I am set in my word whole nights. And behold, here cometh a chariot of men with a couple of horsemen, and he answered and said, Babylon is fallen, and all the graven images of her gods had he broken unto the ground.
Now, what does that sound familiar like? We quote that scripture a lot in the book of Revelations. Babylon is fallen, and is the house of every unclean devil, or every devil and unclean bird. There's parallels between what's written here and what's written in Revelation. So this prophecy is dealing still with the modern times that we're in right now, as well as what was happening between Babylon back then. But there's no coincidence that that scripture is in parallel to what we read about in Revelations, as well as dealing with what actually happened with the Roman Empire and what was happening again with the Parthian or Sassanid Empire. Again, those two empires are dealing in context with Arabs this time, in this scripture, in this time period, and as well as the Israelites that are dwelling amongst them. Because if we're dwelling amongst the Arabs, the political stuff that they're getting into is going to affect the way we're moving as well too, if we live there among them, and we did. And that's a lot of the times why the Most High is even making these prophecies, dealing and talking with the other nations, but also to us that may be amongst these other nations as well too. It's warnings, for us worldwide, as well as plans and prophecies as far as what's going to happen with these nations. Again, we just read about Babylon, America today, but as well as Rome at that time too, because America is called the little horn that came out of the beast. So, and they're one. So this is still dealing with the same kingdom. Again, the Roman eastern half of the Byzantium Empire, Rome, and again the Parthians or Sassanids, which are Elam and Medea that we read in verse 1. Continue where you left off.
O my threshing and the corn of my floor, that which I have heard of the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, have I declared unto you. The burden of Duma
being a tribe of the Arabs,
call it to me out of Seir. Watchman, what of the night? Watchman, what of the night? The watchman said, the morning cometh, and also the night. If ye will inquire ye, return come. The burden upon Arabia.
We don't have to read that. We read that earlier, and I'm not gonna even lie and keep it 100. Those specific prophecies, I'm still trying to piece together myself, so I don't want to give you guys anything more or even really less than where I'm at with my understanding with that. But again, we do see and understand that this is the actual history and scriptural, parallels dealing with Islam and and the Arabs and the rising of the rising, excuse me, of Muhammad and Islam with the Arabs. Now, I believe my brother Yuqatazar has a little information as far as the Arab slave trade, which is definitely something that needs to be mentioned as far as just confirming the prophecy about Ishmael's hand being against pretty much everyone, you know. Did you have anything that you wanted to mention about the Arab slave trade?
Well, concerning the Arab slave trade is first and foremost, that's one of the longest slavery that's recorded in history. And the thing about that is that it's been swept under the rug. They don't really teach it in the schools and everything. So they had many of our brothers. They were castrated. And they ended up becoming eunuchs. And this was done by the Islamic people. You see that? So that's pretty much it. Concerning the Arab slave trade. You guys can look that up. There's videos on that too. And they'll give you the whole breakdown. Kind of like what this one did in regards to the Arab slavery, or in other words, the sub-Saharan slave trade. You guys can look that up.
Khan, yes. Even the trans-Saharan slave trade, you want to keyword that too. Because again, by the time it was like 400 AD, 600 AD, the Islamic influence took over a wide-reaching area from India, which you can still see today. Islam is a major part of India still today, and even to the Philippines, all the way down to or over to the northern part of Africa. So that's a really big stretch of religious influence to be having connections and doing trade and business in harmony with, just out of what Muhammad did coming out of the 12 princes of Ishmael. And again, the trans-Saharan slave trade being Israelites that were traded from as far as West Africa all the way into India. So more scattering, more scattering of our places being in places of the world that aren't even really mentioned or touched about too much in the scriptures themselves, in major prophecies. But knowing that the scripture said that we'd be everywhere, we're going to be everywhere from, again, India, which doesn't get too much talk play in the Bible. China, which doesn't get too much talk play in the Bible. Japan and the islands of the Philippines and the Pacific Islands and Polynesia, which doesn't get too much talk play in the Bible. This is one of the major ones that sent our people over to these places, at least as initiative starts to. So with that all being said, that is, in the best way we could present to you, the rise and some of the causes and effects of the Arab state, or rather the Arab religion. Because again, Islam was created by the Arabs, constructed from pretty much damn near everywhere else, and its influence also spread it to everyone else as well too. But we know we came from, those wild Ishmaelites, the 12 princes. It came from them. And last thing I want to mention too is there's a scripture mentioned in a couple times actually in the Bible that we would be. Let me take that back. That the Most High, He was going to make His presence known through us for the other nations of the world. Not that the Most High would be dealing with them, but the Most High still wants them basically to direct their paths to knowing who He is through us. And religions, for them, religions like Islam actually do that. Even though it had odds with us, if it was something, inoculated and just with them, they technically, got rid of their idols and stuff like that and whatever other practices, and did start believing in a single God. And there's a number of mentionable times where the other nations knew about Yahweh, they knew about our God, but didn't necessarily acknowledge him as such, which isn't really in their nature. They weren't given, the level of personalness that we were given. But in religions like Islam, he is acknowledged. Maybe in another lesson we could do it another day, but in religions like Zoroastrianism, which was influenced by Jews or Israelites, check out the book of Daniel sometime. Through that, the Most High began to be known amongst Japhethites, like in the Persian and the Median Empire. So all of these things, despite the war and the curses that fall upon our people through them, they have their purpose and their point for the Most High's ultimate and total authority. No, we're not going to say you Israelites, our people should go dwelling and following in them, but just know that the things that we do in righteousness affects not only us, but it does affect the rest of the world and other nations as well too. So it should be a thing to understand, to at least to hope for, to know that when we get things right, the rest of the earth is going to get right as well too, as prophesied. That's going to conclude tonight's lesson in world history. We hope that it was edifying and everything that you needed to hear as far as where you want to begin or what you just needed to know, bare minimum basics. With that, I want to say shalom.
Shalom.
It's Maxwell on the